because at least that will help us get our, did I see some drooping faces? Yeah? No, I'm sure we have the stamina to hang on for one more talk, because this is an interesting talk. Tony and Abu Bakr earlier come from Red Panthers, a company, that's Red Panthers there. The company is doing a lot of work in Kochi right now, right? They've been running the local community, they've been driving the local community there. We are also using them to set an example for other cities who are trying to drive the Ruby community locally. If you all need any help on that front, definitely talk to us about it. We'll help you all on this one. Now, Tony himself he's been working in Red Panthers for the last couple of years, and it's a very serious program, as we can see. Smile, Tony. Yes. There you go. So now let's get started on this talk. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible enough? Okay. So first of all, a big thank you to all the organizers of this event for giving me this opportunity to be here to learn from all of you great developers. So shall we start with a big round of applause to the all fantastic organizers of Ruby Conference. Thank you. And let's start with a little about me. I'm Tony Vincent. I'm a developer at Red Panthers. I'm a Ruby developer for the past 2 years, more than 2 years. And I'm from Kerala, the God's own country, as you might already know. And I'm a big football fan. I love books, music, and movies. I'm a big Manchester United fan, so if there are any Manchester United fans in the crowd, say hello during lunch. We'll go and make some Liverpool fans mad. Okay? And I'm an aspiring author. I have a book in mind, and I hope someday I'll be able to pen it down. And you can find me on Twitter as Tony Tile. So I work at Red Panthers, as I told you earlier. We are a software development studio based out of Cochin. We mainly focus on Rails. We do a little bit of Elixir as well. Recently, we have started working on Crystal, and we are one of the few companies that has a production app written in Crystal. You can find us on GitHub as Red Panthers, and we go by the Twitter ID Red Panthers HQ. So let's get started, right? So my talk is reusing the wheel, and this talk is about little known or lesser known Ruby methods and active record methods that help us write better, nice code. And this talk is mainly intended for the beginner developers, and most of the experienced guys around here might already be knowing most of the things that I'm going to discuss with you. So if I might sound a little bit boring for the experienced developers, please bear with me. So the first method I'm going to discuss is objects tab method. The tab method is available from Ruby version 1.9 onwards. Basically, the tab method allows you to modify an object on the fly. So it allows you to do something with an object inside a block, and basically it returns the same object. And the tab is very useful for tapping into method chains. So let's see an example. So this is the traditional way of doing things, right? I have a class, I'm creating a new object and assigning a new property and returning the object. The issue here is the temporary variable and the explicit return of the temporary variable. So just see how this code transforms to a very nice one-liner using tab. So we are modifying the class on the fly using the tab method. So it is a very nice method to further, clean your code up a bit. Then moving on, the next method is the value set method of array and hash. Very useful when you want to get multiple non-sequential values from an array or a hash. Value set return an array containing the values associated with the given indices or keys. And if the specified index or key is not available in the hash or array, basically it is going to return nil. So this is a traditional way of doing stuff, right? So I have an array, and I'm accessing individual items from the array using the index. The problem here is we are repeating the array variable thrice. If the number is kind of big, we are going to repeat it over and over and over again. So using value set, see how the code changes. Using value set, we can just specify the required indices that we want to access, and it is very useful when we want to access individual items from an array. So similarly, for a hash, it works the same way. Instead of repeating the hash variable with the required keys over and over again, just use value set. So I hope all of you guys start using this method more in your code to make it, better. The next method, moving on, the next method we are going to discuss is transform values method of hash, available from Ruby version 2.4 onwards. The thing is, active support has already implemented hash transform values, but Ruby 2.4 made it part of the language library. Very useful when you want to modify all the values of a hash. So here I have a hash, and I want to transform the values to lowercase letters. So this is I'm using an each. Most of the times we often do each for this, but how about doing this instead? Much better, isn't it? So it is going to yield the value, only the values into the block, and we can do the processing inside. And the method offers a destructive and non-destructive version. The bang is the destructive version. It is going to modify the variable itself. Here is the non-destructive version of the transform values method. The next one, this is one of the interesting method available from Ruby 2.2 onwards, I guess. Here is a nice little problem, right? We have an integer 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 6. How do you get each digit from the integer into an array in reverse order? So I used to do this, right? In the beginning, this is what I used to do. I first converted the integer into a string, took the characters, mapped them into integers, and reversed it. Then I learned about this awesome digits method. It just does exactly that without all the map, 2s, 2i, and all. So this is one of the cool methods that we can use to, make our code base compact and better. And also another nice thing is we can specify the base of the number as an argument, as you can see here. Available from Ruby version 2.4 onwards. And as I said earlier, it's very useful when you want to work with individual items or individual digits of an integer. Moving on, B search. So when we work with large arrays, as Rails developers, as Ruby developers, we often work with very large arrays. And when searching through the array, the first option that comes to our mind most of the times is the find method, right? But the problem is find method may not be as much as performant as B search, given that the array is sorted and very large. The B search method has a complexity of big O of log n, so it is much better option. So here is a nice benchmark for that. As you can see, I have a very large range to work with, and when I have, as I told you earlier, when the range is too large and it is sorted, B search performs almost 3 times as better. So in Rails, when the attributes in the database are encrypted, most of the times we load them from the database and we process using the created at timestamp. So this is one of the scenarios where B search can be really helpful. Cycle. The next method we are going to discuss is the cycle of enumerable. This is a very interesting method. Enum cycle is very useful when you want to repeat a pattern a specific number of times or an infinite number of times, or to implement a simple on-off switch. Here we have an example here. So the first example, array.cycle, and we are just printing that, and it is going to repeat that pattern n number of times. In the third line of code, I'm specifying a specific number of times in which it is supposed to repeat. So it is going to repeat exactly 2 times and print it. This is the on-off toggle that I told you about. We are instantiating the array, we are wrapping the array as a cycle, enumerable cycle, and just call Ruby's next, and the Ruby will know what to do with it. So the nice thing here is we don't have to, we don't need to check what the current value of switch to manually update it. So just call Ruby's next and it will process it. Binding.irb, so this is very useful. Let's say that you're working and you don't have pry or buyback not installed, and from Ruby versions 2.4 onwards, binding.irb allows runtime invocation of IRB. very useful for debugging your code. Here is an example. So I'm supposed my intention is to debug the value of instance variable, and I'm calling binding.irb in my code. No pry, no bybug, just Ruby's standard inclusion, binding.irb, and we can debug our code. Moving on, the next method that we are going to discuss is the clamp method of comparable. This is a very nice, interesting one, available from Ruby 2.4 onwards. This method can be used to clamp an object with a specific range of values. So basically how it works is, if the digit or string that we are comparing is within the range, it is going to return the digit or string, whatever it is, itself. So if it is outside the range, the nearest item, the nearest of the min and max values is going to get returned. Let's see an example here. So as you can see in the first example, 10 is within the range, so 10 is going to get returned. In the next example, the nearest one is the minimum value, that is 15, and that's what it returned. Whereas in the third example, as you can see, 10 is nearer to the maximum value, which is 5, and that get returned. Similarly, an example that involves strings works much similar. And internally, the clamp method uses the spaceship operator, as you know, right? If they are saying 0, greater 1, if the comparing instance is less than the second one, then it will return -1. So internally, it uses the spaceship operator of Ruby. The next method we are going to talk about is lazy of enumerable, available from Ruby version 2.0 and onwards. It allows you to iterate over an infinite series of values and take just the values you need. An example will make much sense here. So I have a range, I have an infinite range that I want to iterate over. And in the first way of doing things, that is using map, just the map, it is going to go inside an infinite loop, because it is going to process the entire range first and then fetch the items that we need. Instead of doing this, binding inside lazy will not end up inside an infinite loop. Instead, it will fetch exactly what we need, and it will yield individual items into the block as it is needed. So very useful when you want to work with an infinite series of numbers or infinite series of things. Moving on to active, let's look at some very useful active record methods that might help us to write better compact code. First or create with a block. First or create is very popular. All of us, we all use that very often. But how many of you really use first or create with a block? So here is an example here. So I'm creating a new car with the name of 429. But the thing is that I don't want to check whether if it is already exists. So I go for first or create. But what if I have, like I said, I have a set of additional attributes that I want to add to. Don't go for anything else. Stick with first or create. Just do it inside the block. Specify the brand and year, and you're good to go. So using first or create with the block can help us get rid of most of the conditional checks whether the object already exists in our code bases. The next method is find each. Many of you must be already know about this use case. That is, see, using each is going to, it is going to execute a single query and get all records into memory and then process them further, right? So if you have a very large table and if you have very big data, that is enough to freeze your entire application. Whereas find each is a very nice method, and by default it is going to load into memory a certain number of records. That is by default 1000, and it is configurable, of course. So when you have a very large table and you are in a situation where you are supposed to iterate over most of them, then find each should be your choice if your intention is to not freeze up your application. Here is an example of here. Instead of just calling each, I'm going for find each. So I'm not specifying the width or the range here. So it is going to take the default 1000 objects. The next method that we are going to talk about is toSQL. Uh, so there are times when active record can get messy, right? So at that time we might want to see or inspect what query your active record is generating. You want to see if the query is right and you want to make changes if it is not. So the best thing to do is just go to your Rails console, just call to SQL, and you can see the query that generated by active record in a nice string format. Here is an example for that. So it is going to print out the query generated by active record as a string. So this is very useful when you want to debug the queries that generated by active record. And explain is another very useful active record method. And this is very useful when you want to verify that all the indices that you have created are being picked up correctly. Okay? So basically what it does is it executes the SQL explain and returns the result as a string. So here is a nice example here. Just call explain and the SQL explain will be returned as a string. So you can verify all the indices that you have created are being picked up correctly. Plug is a very popular method, I know. Again, I want to tell about it a bit more. Most of the times we use in the beginning when you start off, most of the times we end up using map, then calling the attribute on the object that is yielded. Instead, just do plug. Plug is much more performant, much more efficient, and makes your code more readable and more compact. See the example here. Instead of mapping and calling title, just plug title from the database. So I hope all these methods, I hope all of you guys start using, most of the beginner guys, all of you guys start using all these methods, and I hope your code base will become beautiful and your tests will be much faster. Thank you very much. And these are my references. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. I'm sure there's some really good methods there. Let's now pluck out for lunch.